Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you. I am Jocelyn Frye. I'm the president at the National Partnership for Women and Families, and I am here with the inimitable, exceptional, brilliant Maya Wiley, who is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And we are here to talk about democracy, abortion, voting rights, and why all of those things actually are connected in this moment. And I first just want to give a big shout out to not only Maya, but all of our friends at the Leadership Conference. They hold so much work. And I think for many of us, really stand at the intersection of so many issues that are fundamental to our progress. And I have worked with the Leadership Conference personally for a long time, and I know how important their work is, and I know how important Maya's leadership is. And so Maya, I'm happy anytime that we can find a little bit of time to chat and connect and talk about the importance of this moment. And I think, where at least I want to start is just talking about why reproductive freedom and the freedom to vote are connected at all. I think people understand that instinctively. But, for me, in thinking about the work of the National Partnership, the Dobbs decision, I think, helped crystallize for many of us the connections between access to abortion, the ability to vote and drive the political process, and how important it is for us to connect those dots.
Well, I just have to say, Jocelyn, before we jump in, right back at you. I think, no one out there who's listening probably knows this, but you and I first met and got to work together at the Leadership Conference when I was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We were both junior lawyers working on access to health care. And in particular, how women of color were going to get the benefits package we need to live healthy, long, prosperous lives. So I've just been really grateful for your leadership at the partnership, but for your leadership in general. And for those who don't know, this is an incredible leader who also led in the Obama White House as a matter of history, but has been a critical partner to the Leadership Conference. The National Partnership has for years, but Jocelyn, I'm just so grateful to have you as a part of this partnership that is going to save democracy. So what's the connection? The connection, and I want to hear how you answer this when you're asked, but for me, first of all, I just say this: there is no saving democracy without recognizing that democracy is about rights, it's about civil rights, it's about their fundamental nature of civil rights, and both abortion and voting are fundamental to democracy. I mean, our ability to have to decide when and how we form families is just a central part of just having basic freedoms in a country that says it values freedom as well as equal opportunity. But even if we go backward, I mean, my first day at the Leadership Conference was the day that the draft Alito decision dropped in Dobbs. And as you know, I mean, the reproductive freedom community knew this was coming, didn't know how it'd be worded, how bad. And so many Americans kind of woke up and went, what? Wait, this is really going to happen? We're really going to see a reversal of the first fundamental right in the history of the country, something that we had for 5 decades. But what I also want people to remember is our same coalition, over 250 national groups now, also had already been fighting to try to get our voting rights back from the Shelby decision at the Supreme Court that Justice John Roberts handed down in 2013, which basically said to all these states that were under what we call preclearance, it said, you have such a bad history of preventing people to vote, particularly people of color, that we're just not going to let you put a new voting rights law out unless it's been vetted and we're clear that it's not going to block people from the ballot. When that went, and that went in 2013, and the Brennan Center, another one of our partner organizations, member organizations, have said that impact of that, the voter suppression that has unleashed 14 million votes on the table in terms of growing the gap between people of color and white voter participation. But when we get to Dobbs, what did the Supreme Court do? So that this is happening, this erosion of voting rights, this for the first time, not seeing bipartisanship on protecting voting rights. But the Supreme Court, then it's Dobbs where the Supreme Court says, we'll just send it back to the states. And voters can decide in the states, even after we already unleashed all these states, so many of the same states that are putting bans on our bodies are the states that would have been under pre-clearance to make sure we all had a voice and whether or not we were going to be able to still have the fundamental right of deciding when and how we start a family. So they're so connected because they're fundamental, but they're also connected in very practical terms around, don't tell us that we have a voice when you've done everything you can as a Supreme Court to erode the power of that voice. And then you're going to pretend like you're somehow creating a democratic process by sending it back to states you're letting discriminate at the ballot box.
Right. Ditto, Maya, absolutely. And I think you said at the start, how would I answer that question? And I would piggyback on what you said and say a couple of things. One is that, and you know this better than anybody, we use democracy to mean a lot of things, and that term means a lot of things. But I think what this conversation should remind everybody of is that our democracy was not built for everybody to be successful. It was not built for women to be equal and have equity in how they experience their lives. It was not built for people of color to have the same power and authority and dignity as everybody else. And so when people ask me about women's progress, what I say is that much of the work of the women's movement has been to correct for that initial problem, right? And so the correction has been about how do we remove these barriers that limit the ability, in particular for women of color, to participate in our society and our democracy, in our workplaces, across society, to be able to participate in a way that's equitable, that's fair, that enables them to sort of lead the lives that they want to lead. And when you understand that broad framework, then you remember why Roe was important, because it anchored this ability to control your body and to decide whether or not you wanted to access abortion squarely in the Constitution as one of its privacy protections, right? Like it provided that sort of constitutional underpinning that had been absent in part because our Constitution didn't contemplate any of that. And it is true for many other aspects of women's progress. So you have to sort of start with that contextual understanding of how we got here. And then, as you point out, when you look at the Dobbs decision, on the heels of already undoing voting rights protections across the country, what Justice Alito says dismissively, blithely, all of the things, dripping with whatever it is, sarcasm, you name it. Well, if women want to fix these things, they can simply just go to their state legislatures and fix it. Now, we know sort of the reality on the ground, particularly in the South, particularly in communities that now don't have the legal rigor to really test whether or not their voting systems are actually operating fairly and equally. We sort of know what that environment looks like. And, one of the things that we wanted to do is kick the tires on that idea. right? And so we did research, as you know, that really tried to dig into, well, let's look at the state legislatures. Let's look about how power actually, gets wielded in these states. And as you alluded to, not surprisingly, if you look at the states that have majority male legislatures, they're more likely to have restrictive abortion policies. It's not, there are a few aberrations, but by and large, that's true. And, notwithstanding what the relative population is of women in a particular state. So, for all of the reasons that you said about the voting restrictions that are happening, the ability simply to identify the lawmakers you want and have the right people to have the right policies isn't actually so simple, right? Like the structural impediments that we have created for people to maintain and hold power are real, and they're deep, and they impede our ability, whether it's on abortion or voting or other issues, to disrupt the power status quo. And so then, in real practical terms, these abortion restrictions and these voting restrictions actually are deeply connected, right? Like, and your ability to change one affects your ability to change the other. And, I will say that's not by accident. That's actually by design, right? So it was important for us to say that, but it was also important for us to connect the dots for people. And it's why it's so important, for you, Maya, to talk about it too, because we have to bring not only a women's frame, but a civil rights frame. It's a democracy frame. We all have to figure out how we get out of our issue silos to connect together on these issues. Um, you know, I will also say, Maya, that it is not lost on me that the folks who are most affected, disproportionately affected, are women of color, Black women, Latinas, Indigenous women. Um, and I know you have been thinking a lot about that, particularly in the context of voting and how that actually plays out on the ground, particularly as we look at things like Project 2025. But, tell me how you're thinking about how we move forward, how we actually achieve change on the ground. You have an answer for everything, Maya.
Sometimes I can just hold up a pillow. But I mean this, right? I mean, this is one of the things I think it's so important what the partnership has done and how you've elevated this issue. And you're absolutely right. We only win when we recognize it's an us.
Mhm.
It's not an us, them. It's an us, because if we're not protecting these rights for us, we're not protecting them for a whole bunch of people. But we are the majority. And, one of the things we saw in 2022 in the midterms, in terms of voter participation, we don't tell people who to vote for, but we know what motivates people to vote. One of the things that we've been doing collectively, including with the partnership, is how we are helping folks to understand their power to vote, making sure both they understand how and where to vote, making sure we're identifying the disinformation and misinformation that is intended to misdirect them. So very, 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 very short example. If someone tells you where to text your vote, don't believe them. You can't text your vote anywhere, but you'll see this kind of disinformation, but it disproportionately targets communities of color to try to reduce communities of color participation. We're also seeing it with young people, of course, in where are polling sites and are they available on college campuses? Because some places have been trying to make it more difficult for college students to vote. Why? Because there are some who are trying to impact who can vote to control the outcomes of the policy debate. That's wrong. We actually work for everyone to be able to vote. We don't ask what people are going to vote for, who they're going to vote for. But here's the thing we know. It is highly motivating for people across, frankly, the spectrum to, one, vote for civil rights. We've seen it in our civil rights monitoring poll we've done as a leadership conference over the past 2 years. We have another poll that will be going out into the field, but the democracy issues, as I call them, because that's what civil rights are. That's what abortion rights is. That's what voting rights is. That's what justice issues like criminal justice, which is also implicated in the abortion, right? These states that now have more ability to potentially criminalize people for seeking reproductive health if it's abortion related. That's wrong, but that can happen. That's a violation of civil rights in our view. But we have seen the increase in people's willingness, motivation, desire to vote because these are issues that are on the table. And so the more we make sure that people, particularly not only, but in particular, 18 to 35 people of color, particularly people who look like us, know and understand that the difference between whether or not we're having a debate about access to healthcare, about the ability to have children and still survive pregnancy, because we forget that a lot of these issues are also about the ability for people to have families and survive, for their babies to survive in their first year of life. These are healthcare issues in addition, and we've seen a marked reduction, as you know, both in access to reproductive health care, affordability and quality because of the attack on abortion. So all the ways in which we need healthcare, as the national partnership has been a leader on, is implicated. But when people know it, they understand it. So the more we make sure they feel and understand they can vote, where to show up to vote, where and how to vote lawfully, that they have the right to do it, how they can do it absentee ballot, all that education that we call And Still I Vote. That's our campaign as the leadership conference, andstillivote.org. Sign up, get information. We're even recruiting people to be poll workers, because protecting democracy means protecting people's ability to have their voice at the ballot box. And we know that it means making sure they can show up for what they care about. And we know abortion increases the motivation to vote, the question of abortion. And so once again, don't tell people who to vote for, but we certainly talk about what rights are at stake and how they can have the power to shape the debate and shape the outcomes of whether they get protected or whether they get their rights trampled.
Right. That work is so important, Maya. So I appreciate your leadership on it. And I think, something that you said stuck with me and is reflected in the research that we've done, and is another fallacy from the Dobbs decision. And that is this idea that all of these issues we're talking about are connected. And I really appreciate your leadership on this, because from the very beginning, from the moment Dobbs hit, you were really connecting the dots for people. And in that decision, one of the things that I think is most egregious and offensive is Justice Alito's unwillingness to even engage in the conversation. He is very dismissive of the robust body of research that talks about the economic and health implications of not having access to abortion. And he largely just says, somebody else should look at that. And it really is dismissive of the experiences of women of color, and what we know can happen when they aren't able to control their own bodies. And, part of our goal with our research has been to try to connect the dots along that front, to talk about the economic implications, to talk about the impacts on maternal health and maternal mortality, and the disproportionate high rates that are experienced by Black and Indigenous women, to sort of tell that story. But I think it is critical in this moment to go even beyond that, right? Like it's their economic implications, their healthcare implications. You see communities that now have lost access to OBGYN care and maternity care. And so the folks who are pregnant, it puts them at risk of whether or not they can have a healthy pregnancy. You now have so many states that don't have abortion access, that people have to travel long distances to get to a state where they can access the care that they need. We know from other research that's been done that low income folks are disproportionately affected by that. So connecting all of those dots is so critical. Because in a moment when there's so much happening, I feel like, sometimes it feels like the world is on fire. We can easily get caught up in our silos. But I think, the work of the leadership conference in particular, but really across our movements, has been so vital for folks connecting those dots.
Can I
Um,
ask you a dot connecting point?
yes.
Because the National Partnership has been doing such great work, and talk about connecting the dots is Project 2025, which is a blueprint coming out of the Heritage Foundation, 100 groups that frankly are generally very much outside of the mainstream of what the majority of Americans think, believe, want, think that the legal regimes should protect. And I really want to make sure we don't end without hearing from you, Jocelyn, on what you think is so important for everyone to understand about Project 2025, because it is a blueprint with a lot of money behind it and a lot of groups, and it is not going away in an election cycle. It is a plan that is going to be with us, and we're going to have to be battling together. So I just think it's so important for people to hear your expertise on that.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that, Maya, because I think where we started is exactly what needs to be hit on Project 2025. Because so much work of the Leadership Conference of the National Partnership is about filling the gaps that have been there since our inception, that have made it harder for women, for people of color to participate in our society. And Project 25 is about stripping that away, right? Abortion access was one of those pillars. It anchored, as I said, access to abortion right squarely in the Constitution. It's a privacy right, right? And the court stripped that away. But Project 2025 goes beyond that. They want national, abortion bans, but they also want things like limiting the ability to enforce equal pay laws, right? And collect data
Overtime,
over time.
overtime.
Collecting data broken down by race and ethnicity that could be used to surface sex discrimination in the workplace and in pay practices. All of these tools that have been instrumental in women being able to participate in society. It's not only abortion, it is their economic participation. It is their ability, again, to be able to support their families the way that many of them continue to do on a daily basis. And so we have to understand that Project 2025 is about undoing decades of progress that has been instrumental in women being able to work where they want to work, control their bodies the way they want to, decide when and if to start a family. Those things that we take for granted are seriously under threat. And to the extent that we want to do anything about it, this is the connection to what you said earlier. They also want to make sure that you can't vote about it, right? Like you can't get the people that you want to support the policies that you think make sense. And they want to undo our ability to have regulations, right? Like all the things that are essential to having a law that works for everybody. They even want to get rid of people in the federal government. right? Like that's the other thing. The public sector has been a place where women and
The
people
nonpartisan public
non
sector, the
nonpartisan,
civil
the
servants who
civil
are
service.
not there as political appointees.
Exactly. I mean, I say this as a daughter, both my parents are deceased, but they were long, 30 plus years federal government workers, civil servants just doing their job every day, right? And that's been a place, particularly for Black folks, where they were able to get into the middle class because back in the day, there were not enough of those types of jobs that were available to them. So this is far reaching, Maya. And I think people should be clear about it. We all have a stake in it. And you're right. It's an old playbook, but it's, all, 900 plus pages of it is all fancy and new, but it's an old story. And the fight will continue.
It's an old story, and I'm going to call it what it is. It's a Christian nationalist story. And by the way, there's Christianity, both my grandparents on both sides of my family, devout Christians. So this isn't about whether Christianity is good or bad. It's about whether we have a government that says we are going to ascribe to the viewpoints of, frankly, a conservative view of Christian nationalism. That is exactly the opposite of what our founders wanted or believed in. But in Project 25, because I just want to make a couple of points that you've named and sharpen them. They're coming for contraception. They're coming, from your point, as you said, they're coming for mifepristone. They can use the powers of federal agencies and government to weaken even something that is otherwise would be lawful. And I just think people need to understand that. And they also want to weaken the Department of Justice through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A lot of what we've been talking about are protections that you have named, Jocelyn, so rightly, as employment protections, things that gave women more opportunities, more economic advancement, people of color, of all genders and gender identities. This is fundamentally a way of saying we're going to roll the Civil Rights Act of 1964 back, including the Department of Justice's civil rights enforcement powers. And that's where voting rights gets protected. That's where we protect and ensure that things like whatever federal agencies are saying, like healthcare access in emergency rooms and federal facilities that include abortion, that is the difference between that happening or not happening. And so just to put a fine point on it, you are so right. It is so critical to relate the economic to the health, physical health, and just basic rights to identify and be who we are and choose to live our lives the way we want to live is under attack by Project 2025. And I'm just grateful that we have the partnership, because thanks to the partnership and so many other of our member organizations, we, the majority, will not go back.
Well, right back at you, Maya. Thank you. You know, you talked about how long we have known each other. And truthfully, I could spend all afternoon chatting with you, and we could actually just like fix everything.
If only everyone did as we suggested.
It's true. It is true. But I'm so glad that we at least found this time to chat, and to connect the dots, hopefully for people about issues that we think are important. I know you think are important, and I know many of the people who are listening and will listen to this believe are important. Our democracy is at stake in so many ways. But it's important for us to understand how we all connect the dots together. I appreciate the leadership that the Leadership Conference brings on all of these issues. It is a place where we can all connect together. I'm as challenging a moment as this is, I am optimistic. I'm optimistic because I do believe in the power of coalition, and I do believe that we can work together to really drive important change. And so, I'm in the fight with you,
Yeah.
and we'll get it done.
We will get it done and we'll get it done together. Amen,
Absolutely.
my sister.
All righty.
All right. Take good care.
You too.
Bye.